Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Szeltner in our Washington, D.C. studio. It is good to have you here with us. Pro-life leaders urge senators to confirm Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court as his confirmation hearings began this week. Gorsuch is President Donald Trump's pick to fill the late Justice Antonin Scalia's seat on the Supreme Court. During this week's confirmation hearings, Gorsuch said he will not give his personal views on Roe v. Wade, the high court case that legalized abortion nationwide. And under questioning, Gorsuch said President Trump did not ask him to overturn the abortion ruling when he was interviewed for the nomination. Gorsuch added that promising such a thing is, quote, not what judges do. In a letter to pro-life leaders during the presidential campaign, Trump promised he would nominate a pro-life justice. Mallory Quigley is the communications director for the Susan B. Anthony List, the pro-life advocacy group we're teaming up with for this program. It's good to have you here, Mallory.
Thanks so much for having me on, Catherine.
So first off, is Judge Neil Gorsuch the pro-life judge that President Trump had promised?
I think absolutely. I think we have a series of court cases to look back on. His record is very strongly pro-life, pro-religious freedom, and he may not be coming out and saying that during the hearing this past week, but that is certainly his record, and that pro-lifers should be very pleased with this pick.
So as I mentioned at the top of the show, it came out in the hearings that President Trump did not ask Gorsuch if he would overturn Roe v. Wade during their interview. Are you surprised by this? What do you make of this?
Well, it's no surprise. You know, justices make a pledge to the Constitution, not to the president. And so he has very clearly established that he has a jurisprudence that is very strong constitutionalist, originalist viewpoint. And this is very important for pro-lifers because there's not a right to abortion in the Constitution. Rather, there is a right of the state to defend its citizens and ensure their right to life. And we would argue, obviously, born and unborn. So it's no surprise that he pledged to come out and overturn Roe versus Wade. It would be imprudent for any justice to talk about a future court case completely hypothetically, not knowing any of the parties or the pieces of legislation that may or may not be challenged. But we did have this last week Senator Graham bring up a piece of legislation that was likely to be challenged.
What was that?
That was the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Yeah, he's the lead sponsor in the Senate, Senator Graham is, and I thought it was a really beautiful moment of pro-life leadership that he used his microphone and this opportunity when he was questioning Judge Gorsuch to talk about this legislation and to talk about that the United States is only one in 7 nations and that this is a piece of legislation that does indeed challenge a major premise of Roe versus Wade.
And once again, that legislation deals with banning abortion at 20 weeks because it's scientifically proven babies feel pain at that point.
Exactly.
So there's a chance that will come to the Supreme Court if Gorsuch is confirmed. Now, there was also mentioned that Roe v. Wade is not a super precedent. What does this mean exactly? What does this indicate to pro-lifers?
Sure. Well, Judge Gorsuch did not acknowledge it as super precedent. He did say, you know, this is the status quo. It is precedent, but that, again, it's not really cause for concern. He didn't come out and say that he agreed with the decision. He's following the Ginsburg precedent, which is a long-standing history, a tradition for judicial nominees not to discuss future court cases that they may rule on. It's something that Justice Ginsburg did. She's, of course, a very pro-abortion advocate.
Now, turning matters a bit, we are expecting an upcoming Senate vote on the American Health Care Act, which would repeal and replace Obamacare. What are you monitoring closely in this legislation?
Well, we all need to be monitoring very closely the Hyde protections and the defunding Planned Parenthood provision that were included in the House bill. Now, the Senate is where things get a little bit tricky because, of course, we've got the reconciliation process. And now it's very complicated, but I'll suffice to say that anything included in the budget reconciliation bill needs to have an impact on the budget bottom line. Hyde protections, of course, that is financial policy, deals with money. It does deal with the bottom line, but it is also social policy. Americans don't want their taxpayer dollars going to fund abortion businesses like Planned Parenthood or healthcare plans that cover abortion on demand. So we've got to pay attention to make sure that this stays in. It's the Senate parliamentarian that is sort of the partisan umpire that makes these judgments, and that's what we need to look forward to this week. And we need to keep telling our senators to insist that these protections remain in the bill.
And there is a way to do that through our call to action. Mallory, Quigley, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
As the Senate vote for the American Health Care Act nears, your pro-life voice is more important than ever. Here is how you can get involved in the pro-life movement this week. For this week's call to action, go to sba-list.org/action. Tell your senators to insist the health care legislation defund Planned Parenthood and include high protections to stop the taxpayer funding of health care plans that cover abortion, or to oppose the bill if it doesn't. At this website, you'll simply fill out some personal information, and then a letter will be drafted for your specific congressman. Once again, go to sba-list.org/action. To find out what representatives are doing to ensure pro-life protections remain in the health care bill, let's talk to a member of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus. Republican Representative Keith Rothfus of Pennsylvania joins us now. Thank you for your time, Congressman.
Good to be here today.
House Republicans have introduced their plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Congressman, you know well how Americans have been affected by Obamacare. Bishop Zubik's office is in your Pennsylvania district. As a reminder to our viewers, Zubik versus Burwell was the Supreme Court case challenging the contraceptive mandate. Congressman, tell us the impact you have heard and seen the Obamacare contraceptive mandate have on your constituents.
Well, again, Bishop Zubik had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to protect religious freedom. And it wasn't just Bishop Zubik, it was Geneva College in my district. There was a requirement by the federal government that religious entities would have to provide abortifacient drugs. It violated their conscience. They went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court deadlocked 4-4, sent it back to be resolved. We now have a new Secretary of Health and Human Services. I understand that this is still in litigation. My hope is that there's going to be an accommodation for religious charities and people who do not want to have their consciences violated.
That is an issue we are closely following here on EWTN. The new health care bill House Republicans put forward redirects Planned Parenthood funds to community health centers and contains protections to stop the funding of abortion. In your opinion, should this be a priority in the health care plan?
Absolutely, it should be a priority. You know, an overwhelming majority of Americans, regardless of how they feel about abortion, they do not think federal taxpayers should be footing the bill for abortion. And nearly half of people who describe themselves as pro-choice agree that taxpayer funding should not go to abortion. We know that there have been health plans through Obamacare that pay for abortions, and federal tax dollars have found their ways into those plans. We cannot let that happen. There has to be a bright line where not one federal dollar is going to go to help provide an abortion or to organizations that promote abortion.
Now, the reconciliation process makes it tricky for these pro-life protections to carry over into the Senate version of the bill. So what are Republicans doing to ensure that ultimately taxpayer dollars, as you said, do not go to fund abortion on demand or health care plans that cover abortion?
Well, those of us in the Pro-Life Caucus are insisting that this language stay in the final legislation. And so we have very good language in there right now, and we continue to press to have that language in the bill.
On the topic of life, you recently introduced legislation to overturn D.C.'s assisted suicide law. Congress failed to overturn the law ultimately, and D.C.'s law has gone into effect. But why did you think it was important to try and strike the assisted suicide law down?
The assisted suicide laws in this country fundamentally changed the nature of the doctor-patient relationship. You know, people go to their doctor expecting to be affirmed, looking for hope, looking for ways to overcome sicknesses. Very often people find a terminal diagnosis. They're looking for support. They want to make sure that there's going to be pain relief in case there's going to be pain. They should not have to worry about going to a doctor thinking that the doctor may write a prescription to help end their lives. This is a very serious issue. We have heard of stories, for example, in California, where a woman was offered to have the suicide drugs paid for, but not her chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. We think there is a bright line there, and that we should not be allowing this kind of activity by doctors to help patients end their lives.
Congressman, you are Catholic. Does your Catholic faith influence your work as a legislator, specifically when it comes to life?
Only to the extent that Catholics are called to serve. This is a public service. I think when you look at pro-life issues, these are human rights. These are fundamental human rights that are articulated in our Declaration of Independence, rights that are given by a creator. We've had this as part of the fabric of our constitutional republic. Inalienable rights, rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, protections in the Constitution against being deprived of your life without due process of law. Again, there are atheists for life. There are people who don't believe. There are all types of religions that take a stand against abortion because they realize that the unborn is a person, is a human person entitled to protection of fundamental rights.
Representative Keith Rothfus, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
The U.S. bishops are also speaking out about the health care bill. In a letter to the U.S. House of Representatives, Bishop Frank DeWayne of Venice, Florida, praised the bill's pro-life protections, calling them a key moral requirement for our nation's health care policy. The chair of the U.S. Bishops' Domestic Justice and Human Development Committee also pointed out the legislation creates grave challenges for the poor and vulnerable. Bishop DeWayne says he wants to work with Congress on these issues. In more life-related news, Christian attorneys asked the U.S. Supreme Court to halt a California law forcing pro-life pregnancy centers to provide free advertising for the abortion industry. Alliance Defending Freedom filed the petition with the High Court Monday. They argue forcing pro-life centers, which include 3 of their clients, to advertise the state's abortion centers is contrary to their mission and violates their constitutionally protected freedoms. Tuesday marked World Down Syndrome Day. It was created to raise awareness of what Down syndrome is and how people with Down syndrome play a vital role in the community. Down syndrome, or trisomy 21, is a naturally occurring chromosomal arrangement that's always been a part of the human condition. It can cause varying degrees of intellectual and physical disabilities. In a disturbing trend, 100% of babies with Down syndrome are aborted in Iceland. A British university receives the first ever approval to create babies using DNA from 3 people. Newcastle University scientists say they want to prevent women from passing on potentially fatal genetic diseases to their children. Critics say this technique opens the door to genetically modified designer babies. The Catholic Church opposes all forms of artificial insemination. Kansas's Supreme Court will rule on a 2015 law that bans a second trimester abortion procedure. The question is whether the Kansas Constitution protects abortion rights independently of the U.S. Constitution. If the state Supreme Court justices say it does, Kansas could strike down abortion restrictions that federal courts have or would uphold. It's not clear when the court will rule. The pro-life message is winning with young people. 53% of millennials, the generation born between 1982 and 2004, believe abortion should be illegal in all or most circumstances. That's according to a 2016 study released by the Institute for Pro-Life Advancement. To hear more about how the pro-life message resonates with young people, we turn to an expert on the topic. Kristin Hawkins is president of Students for Life of America. Kristin, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you work with college students every single day. What are you seeing? Are they gravitating towards the pro-life message?
Young people are definitely gravitating towards the pro-life message. I mean, we see this all the time on college and high school campuses. We have more than 1,100 clubs in high schools and colleges across the country. Planned Parenthood regularly boasts of having 200. We see this at the March for Life, where majority of those people who are out here in Washington in the streets, in the cold, they're young people. This is an issue that resonates with them.
What message in particular do you think really captures their attention, really grabs their attention? I mean, both of us are millennials and we are pro-life. Why do you think that is?
I think, especially this generation sees this issue of abortion as a human rights issue. Mm-hmm. They recognize the humanity of the child in the womb. They've mm-hmm. seen their brothers and sisters via ultrasound. They know it's not simply a blob of tissue. Mm-hmm. So we're starting from a different point when we're on campuses and we're talking to them, engaging them about this issue.
Mm. Now, Students for Life, often the slogan is, we are the pro-life generation, and millennials are mostly pro-life. But this culture is increasingly secular as well and not religious. So how should pro-lifers take that into consideration when reaching out to millennials?
I think that's a really great question. It's something we face a lot of times. I actually talk a lot to audiences about how we can actually use the pro-life issue to bring people back to their faith because they understand that the child in the womb has value, and they understand that it's a person with rights. And then we ask them, well, why? Who gave them those rights? Why does that child have value? And those are questions that they can't answer in this increasingly secular society because they don't know how human beings receive and get their value. Right. But so when we're on campuses and we're talking about this issue, we always talk about, from a secular perspective, we talk about science. And we're pro-life because science. And we use that to start that conversation. But then the conversation always goes down to value and personhood of that child, and that's where we have the real conversations.
It leads to the truth. Now, you recently announced a new campaign, Socket2PP. Tell us about this. What's the goal here?
Yeah, so the campaign is socket2pp.com. This campaign is going to be a game changer. One of the things we've been seeing on Capitol Hill and our conversations with congressmen and senators is that they're not hearing from us, the pro-life grassroots, the majority of America. You know, we had this election, we told everyone we sent to Washington, defund Planned Parenthood, but we're not talking about it. So you know who's the loudest voice in the room right now? Planned Parenthood. They're the ones calling their members of Congress and their senators, encouraging and demanding that they don't defund Planned Parenthood. So we're using this campaign, and we're hoping this campaign is a way to mobilize this grassroots and our generation. And so we want people to mail a sock, a baby sock, a clean baby sock, to us, and we're going to actually present these baby socks to Congress. We're collecting 323,999 for one baby. Every sock will represent one baby that Planned Parenthood kills each year.
Then what's the goal with using those socks then if people send them in?
The goal is we go to Congress, we're going to do a big event. I can't share how we're going to display it because quite honestly, we haven't figured out how to display. If we would line up all 300,000 of those socks, it would be 400 times the height of the Statue of Liberty.
Incredible.
So thank goodness we have a big warehouse. So keep sending the socks into us, but we'll be presenting them to Congress. If they don't defund Planned Parenthood, the socks are going to go on a road trip.
Wow.
And we're going to be taking those socks into the states, showing the senators and congressmen what they betrayed us and who they betrayed by not defunding Planned Parenthood. So get a sock, mail it to us, take another sock, pin it on your sweater, your jacket, your backpack, wear it around, start the conversation, and then start calling your members in Congress and Senate.
That'll be a message that is hard to ignore.
Yeah.
Kristin Hawkins, President of Students for Life of America, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, meet little Jaxon, who at 2.5 years old is a medical marvel and proves that every life has a purpose. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Szeltner. For this week's Speak Out segment, we're calling out Tomi Lahren's pro-abortion comments recently made on ABC's The View. Tomi Lahren, a host for The Blaze TV, was a guest on the daytime talk show The View last week. When asked about her views on abortion, Lahren said, "I am a constitutional, someone that loves the Constitution. I'm someone that's for limited government, so I can't sit here and be a hypocrite and say I'm for limited government, but I think the government should decide what women do with their bodies." Pro-abortion comments are made on The View and other network shows frequently. That is, unfortunately, no surprise. But what is surprising is that these comments came from Lahren, who was expressing very different opinions not long ago. In December of 2016, just 3 months back, Tomi Lahren made pro-life comments on her show. She called abortion the killing of babies and criticized the pro-choice movement. It's not only Tomi Lahren's flip-flopping on this issue that is confusing and disappointing, but it's also the lack of understanding about the U.S. Constitution's defense of life. For example, the 14th Amendment clearly states, "No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." That's right, the right to life. Tommy has been suspended from the Blaze all this week. There's been a lot of pushback, but just a last thought. Tommy, it is excellent to speak up for women, but let's be very clear. Rights end when another life begins. Tommy, from one young host to another, I also encourage you to examine how the U.S. Constitution does protect life and to use your platform to accurately depict the pro-life movement, especially being that you're someone who is so vocal about self-defense. How about being vocal for the most defenseless of all, the unborn? Remember, there is a role you, our viewers, have to counter today's culture of death by following this week's call to action. Go to sba-list.org/action and tell your congressman to defund Planned Parenthood via the reconciliation bill. Brandon and Brittany Buell were told their son Jaxon wouldn't make it full term. Then he wouldn't survive a few days, then a few weeks. But now Jaxon Buell is 2.5 years old. Meet the little boy who is defying all the odds, all because his family decided to say yes to life.
Hi, buddy.
You're just in a snuggling kind of mood this morning, aren't you?
I love you, buzz.
Like many young married couples, Brandon and Brittany Buell were excited to learn in late 2013 they were expecting a baby. It was a bundle of joy soon strained by troubling news. The Buells' 17-week ultrasound indicated their growing baby boy likely had spina bifida.
They painted a very negative picture. They transferred us to a high-risk clinic in Orlando, Florida, and we went through ultrasound after ultrasound, week after week.
We went twice a week, it seemed like, for some sort of ultrasound, some sort of testing, some sort of counseling. Even our genetic counselor, who was supposed to be neutral, steered us more towards an abortion or termination, as they called it.
Right.
And even we denied it, and they scheduled it anyways, just in case we changed our minds.
But Brandon and Brittany didn't change their minds. And on August 27, 2014, Jaxon Buell was born, missing roughly 80% of his brain.
Well, I remember laying there when I was getting my C-section, and he tried to prepare me for just even how small his head was. And even that first initial shock was like, okay, we're really in for something, because he was a lot smaller than I ever anticipated.
Jaxon, as far as doctors can tell, is not in pain, but is severely disabled. He receives his nutrition from a tube and has frequent startle seizures.
It's okay. Hey,
It's all right,
Mommy's
big
right here. I
guy.
got you. Did you fall asleep?
Misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis, the Buells finally learned their son's condition when he turned 1. Jaxon has microhydranencephaly, which means there's spinal fluid where his brain's left and right hemispheres should be. Brandon and Brittany made a decision early on in their parenting. Instead of preparing for Jaxon's death, they would focus on Jaxon's life.
We want him to experience as much as possible, and it's really benefited him because he's really smart and strong and he's learning.
They document his strides in Facebook videos.
Bud. Mommy's proud of you. Look at you eating that cookie.
Jaxon eating on his own.
Good job! Look at those big steps.
Jaxon attempting to walk. The Buells even claim to hear their son say, "I love you," like in this moment, captured here.
I love you.
Jaxon recently passed the 2.5-year mark, another achievement defying what the family's doctors predicted.
There's a great chance he will not survive. And then if he does survive, he'll probably never hear, probably never see, probably never walk, probably never talk, probably never know when he's hungry, basically not be able to do anything effectively. We still walked forward in our own faith saying it's not our choice.
The Buells want to help other families also living with a medical marvel, so they created the Jaxon Strong Foundation to help raise awareness and funds for neurological research. And the Christian couple released a book chronicling lessons they've learned. It's titled, Don't Blink.
This life is short. Happiness is fleeting. Nothing lasts forever. And it's enjoying the moment. It's seizing the day. It's carpe diem.
You mentioned that Jaxon was here born for a purpose. What do you think that purpose is?
I think it comes down to hope. He's already touched so many more lives than I will ever be able to touch. And he's not even 3. We know better than anybody else, there's a great chance we outlive our son. And although that'll be tough, if and when that day happens, it does not discount anything he's done. It does not take away any value he has. Value is not in how many days you're here, but it's truly to show that every single one of us has a unique story and what we can contribute to society.
I love you, Jaxon.
What a big impact one little boy can have on the world. That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. You can reach us anytime with questions, ideas, comments at ProLifeWeekly@EWTN.com. I look forward to seeing you here again next week. Life is a gift. God bless.